Today, we're going to dive into a story that feels almost like David and Goliath, but for the 21st century. How on earth does the most advanced, most expensive military on the planet get outsmarted by a much, much smaller opponent? We're going to break it all down.
But before we get into the how, we really have to wrap our heads around the why. Why is this whole situation so shocking? Well, it all comes down to the absolutely massive scale of the US military. I mean, for decades now, it has been in a class all by itself. And a huge piece of that power, well, it boils down to this number right here. We're talking about roughly $1 trillion every single year. That's a level of spending of pure financial might that no other country even comes close to. So what does $1 trillion get you? Well, it gets you a pretty terrifying force. You've got over 1.3 million active duty soldiers, an air force with more than 13,000 aircraft, the most powerful navy to ever sail the seas. And that's not even counting the cutting edge stuff. The cyber weapons, the spy satellites, their tech is supposed to be unbeatable.
Okay, so that's the setup, this unstoppable machine, which brings us to the core puzzle we're trying to solve today. Why is this behemoth struggling against a nation whose entire defense budget is less than 2% of its own? A nation that's been squeezed by sanctions for decades. It just doesn't add up.
So where did the cracks start to show? The first clues popped up in the one place you'd least expected, the sky. This is where American air power was supposed to be completely untouchable. But it wasn't. Just look at this matchup. On one side, you've got the F-35 stealth fighter. This isn't just any jet. It's the crown jewel of a multi-trillion-dollar program. It's designed to be completely invisible to radar. And on the other side, a modified Soviet-era missile. We're talking tech from the 90s. This should be no contest, right? So how in the world did they pull this off? It wasn't about having better tech. It was about being smarter. See, they didn't even try to find the F-35 with radar. They knew that was a losing game. Instead, they went old school. They used an infrared system, which is basically a super-sensitive heat detector, to look for the one thing stealth can't hide, the massive plume of heat coming from the jet's engine. Once they locked onto that heat signature, boom, they fired a modified 30-year-old heat-seeking missile. Just like that, $1 trillion jet taken down by a bit of clever thinking and old tech. And look, this wasn't just a one-off thing with the F-35. The US drone program got hammered too. We're talking about a dozen or so MQ-9 Reaper drones lost in just the first few weeks. Now, at $16 million a pop, you're looking at a bill of around $200 million. And the crazy part is, people had been warning about this for years. They kept saying these big, slow, non-stealthy drones were sitting ducks. Turns out, they were absolutely right. All right, so the skies were a problem. But what about at sea? Surely the US Navy, the most powerful fleet in history, would have a better time. Well, the story there is just as wild, and in one case, pretty embarrassing, to be honest. Let's talk about the USS Gerald R. Ford. This isn't just an aircraft carrier. It is the newest, the biggest, and the most expensive warship ever built. $13 billion. It's supposed to be a floating fortress, the ultimate symbol of American might on the waves. So what happened to this symbol of power? Well, it just goes to show you that even the most complex machines have really simple weak spots. According to reports, this $13 billion warship wasn't hit by a torpedo or a missile. It was put out of commission by a fire. A fire that started in the laundry room. It took them 30 hours to put it out, and some reports even suggest the whole incident was tied to really low crew morale after being at sea for so long. And we need to be clear here. When we talk about a carrier, we're not just talking about one ship. It's the heart of something called a carrier strike group. That's a huge fleet. You've got the carrier, destroyers, submarines, thousands of sailors. It's basically like taking the entire air force of a small country and putting it on the ocean. So with that in mind, check this out. Another one of these massive carrier groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln, was basically taken out of the fight without a single shot being fired. How? The threat of Iranian anti-ship missiles was so real, so credible, that the entire fleet had to stay 1,000 kilometers away from the coast. At that distance, its planes are pretty much useless. This is what you call a mission kill. You haven't sunk the ship, but you've made it completely ineffective. The most powerful navy on Earth held at arm's length. So we've seen failures in the air and at sea. The story on the ground, unfortunately, follows the same pattern. The US had poured billions into a high-tech missile shield that was supposed to make its bases in the region totally invulnerable.
That was the idea, anyway.
And this isn't just some fence. It's an incredibly expensive, multi-layered system. You've got the THAAD system, which costs over $800 million for just one battery. Then you have the Patriot missiles, which can cost up to $4 million for each missile you fire. This whole setup was designed for this exact situation, to stop missile attacks. And yet, it didn't work. Plain and simple. Iranian missiles and drones just flew right through it, again and again, hitting U.S. bases and causing millions of dollars in damage. The world's most advanced, most expensive air defense system just failed when it was needed most.
And if you want to know just how bad it was, look at this number. $1.1 billion. That's the price tag for a single piece of gear that was destroyed, a super advanced radar. This thing could see for 5,000 kilometers. It was one of the key eyes for the U.S. in the entire region. Losing it was a massive, massive blow. Okay, so the tech is failing in the air, it's failing at sea, and it's failing on the ground. This forces us to ask the big question. Why? What is going on here? And the answer, it seems, isn't about the weapons themselves. It's about the thinking behind them. It's about strategy.
And when you look at the strategies, it's like night and day. On the one hand, analysts point out that the U.S. approach seemed confused. There were no clear goals, leadership was sending mixed signals, and they were always reacting, not planning ahead. And on the other side, Iran's strategy was seen as disciplined, focused, with very clear objectives. They knew what they wanted to do, and they did it. You know, it really makes you think of that old saying, a sword is only as good as the person who wields it. And this whole conflict feels like a perfect modern-day example of that. You can have the best, most expensive weapons in the world, but if you don't have a smart, coherent strategy telling you how to use them, they're basically useless. So what's the big takeaway here? It leaves us with a really critical question about the future of war itself. Is a smart strategy actually more valuable than having the biggest, most expensive toys? Can clever, cheap, asymmetric tactics consistently win against a technologically superior giant? I'll tell you what, that's a question that military planners all over the world are scrambling to answer right now.